Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. The traditional Islamic greeting, I bid all of you peace. My name is Afif Rahman and I am the co-president of the Islamic Society of Northeastern University. Ladies and gentlemen, faculty and fellow students, dear Northeastern community and guests, welcome to the inaugural event of Islam 360, a series of eclectic events organized and held by ISNU this spring to explore Islam as a tradition with a rich cultural legacy through the lens of scholarship, poetry, food, romance, profound and humanizing personal accounts of faith, politics, and history. Our event today is Refugee Camps, Typewriters, and Makeup, the Millennial Muslims. The first three nouns being associated with an experience of our esteemed panel of speakers who themselves are Millennial Muslim Americans and leaders in the community. Refugee camps are to Dr. Sarah Kureshi, Typewriters are to Haroon Moghul, and Makeup is obviously to Wajahat Ali. The term millennial refers to the demographic cohort born in the early 1980s up till the early 2000s. The generation with liberal attitude towards social and cultural issues, less likely to practice organized religion, and the Peter Pan generation, the one with the perceived tendency to delay the rites of passage into adulthood. My objective definition of millennial Muslim is, at least for those who are raised in the States, anyone during their formative years who is a conscious and appreciative witness to the global boy band craze, witnessing particularly NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, but that's just me. In a time of heightened religious and cultural consciousness, or merely consciousness surrounding labels of personal identity, the discourse on Muslims in the West, in both Muslim circles and the general public, has evolved from inquiring about whether Muslim and Western values, identities are at odds to the assimilation and integration of Muslims into the fabric of Western culture and society. Indeed, both of these discussions are based on the premise that Islam and Muslims are supposedly foreign to the West, which many justifiably refuse to acknowledge and accept. Nonetheless, ISNU wanted to push the discourse further and wanted to bring to light that there are those among us who have transcended the conversation by being leaders, public figures, who are awesome at what they do in the West, specifically in the US, and are Muslim, coupled with our interest in the millennial generation, of which our student body is firmly a part. We ask, who are the Millennial Muslims here in the US? So in the typical random sampling fashion, ISNU found an accurate representative sample of the typical Muslim millennial. A physician, professor, human rights advocate, former NCAA Division I athlete, and according to Huffington Post, the #1 Muslim who saves lives, Dr. Sarah Kureshi. Next, a TV anchor on Al Jazeera, playwright, essayist, former attorney at law, and according to Business Insider, the 13th hottest TV journalist alive. They actually did not say hottest, it was another word. Let's use that now. And finally, a writer, columnist, editor for numerous online publication outlets, PhD candidate in Middle Eastern and South Asian Studies at Columbia University, and an author of the book, The Order of Light, in 2006 that eerily predicted the events leading up to the Arab Spring. The format of tonight's event is a panel discussion with our moderator, Zainara Malik, a member of ISNU and a fifth-year International Affairs major. We'll be opening up the floor to questions after the discussion. This is Refugee Camps, Typewriters, and Makeup, the Millennial Muslims. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to our panelists.
Thank you, Afif. So as Afif mentioned, my name is Zainara. I'm a fifth-year International Affairs major here at Northeastern University. I'm just going to start out by reading the biographies for all of our speakers tonight, and then let them talk for about 5-10 minutes each, and then we'll open up the floor for the questions that you guys have. Great. Okay, so Dr. Sarah Kureshi is a graduate of University of Florida with a bachelor's in biology, and then Mayo College of Medicine and Harvard School of Public Health. She completed her residency in family medicine at UCLA UCSF in 2010, and then a fellowship in community health at Georgetown in 2012. She has a special interest in gender-based violence, human rights and health, and empowerment, especially pertaining to refugee and immigrant populations and trauma survivors. Being a former NCAA college athlete and a first U.S. Female athlete to compete in Iran since 1979 revolution, she has a strong passion for using sports as a tool for violence prevention and health education. Sarah has previously worked with girls rescued from sex trafficking in New Delhi, lady health workers in Kashmir, and Somali refugee community in Minnesota. After her fellowship, she spent 2 years at Unity Health Center, where she provided primary health care in an urban underserved population in DC. She serves as a physician of human rights, asylum network providers, and also works on youth empowerment and food justice programming for Project Reach. A grassroots Muslim-led community developed and a social justice organization in inner city DC. As assistant professor in Department of Family Medicine at Georgetown, Dr. Kureshi serves as a co-director of Patients, Population and Policy Module and teaches on global health and human rights, advises the Family Medicine Interest Group, and precepts residents in clinic and in the hospital. Okay. Sorry, my eyes. I apologize. Wajahat Ali is the award-winning playwright for the Domestic Crusaders, one of the first major plays about American Muslim experience published in McSweeney's. He is the lead author of the investigative report Fear Incorporated, the Root of Islamophobia Network in America, produced by the Center for American Progress. He is currently working on a TV plot with author David Eggers about an American Muslim cop. He is writing his first movie screenplay with filmmaker Joshua Seftel, and most of you may know him as the co-host for the Al Jazeera America show The Stream. Haroon Moghul is a fellow in Muslim politics and societies at the Center for National Security at Fordham Law. He writes a weekly column for Al Arabiya English and is a doctoral candidate at Columbia University. Previously, he was a National Security Study Fellow at the New American Foundation. Haroon's 2006 novel that Afif referred to, The Order of Light, anticipated the Arab Spring. In it, a young Egyptian lights himself on fire and starts a revolution across the Middle East. Haroon has been published in the Boston Review, Salon, Foreign Policy, Al Jazeera, to name a few. In 2015, Yale University Press will publish Haroon's journey from atheism to Islam on how to be a Muslim. Can you join me in welcoming our today's speaker?
All right, assalamu alaikum everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm representing makeup tonight, apparently. I don't know how I'll represent makeup, but I'll try my best on behalf of makeup to represent it well. Thank you to Zunera for that very kind introduction and for driving us yesterday in a zip car and not killing us from the airport. Thank you to Afif for proving that men can wear pink and blue at the same time with swagger, mashallah. And I'd just like to know that it was not the 13th most, what do you say? Hottest, it was sexiest. And the reason why you need to mention that, I was in Karachi, Pakistan, where my family is, and they went around telling everyone, this is Wajahat, our nephew from America. He is the 5th sexiest male journalist in America. And you have to realize, in my family, you don't use the word sexy. So to hear like your grandmother say the word sexy repeatedly in Pakistan was like a big deal. I'm like, I wasn't actually the 5th. They said it was the 13th. He goes, we counted the men, and you were in the top 5 of the men. And so they literally went around saying the 5th sexiest male journalist. And my family heard me and they're like, so 13th, huh? Why couldn't you be top 3? Work on that next year. Salah. But in 5 minutes, what I'll just really quickly do, because I think we want to get into Q&A, and that's where we'll have fun and have a conversation with Sarah, who's my wife, whose bio made me feel like a failure in life. Thank you, Sarah, for being an overachiever. It's disgusting. And Haroon, mashallah, who's brilliant and going to entertain us, whether we like it or not, is, I still haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up. And I'm not just saying that, I really mean I still really haven't figured out what I want to be when I grow up. I guess I'm still Peter Pan, but the brown version, who eats dal. And I think that's important because when I was in 4th grade, I remember vividly in a car ride back from school, thinking, okay, so I'm born to Pakistani parents, and everyone in my community values success based on occupation. And in the highest station for a South Asian, I don't know if it's still true for the millennials, because technically we're not millennials, but you didn't hear me say that because I was born in 1980. But that's fine for the purpose of today. I'll be a millennial. I just missed it. Was doctor. Is that still with you guys? Most people are nodding their head. But that new guy just became the head of Microsoft. So it like screwed us up for like life. So you kids now is not going to be like, when I was growing up, it's like you have to be a doctor. Now it's going to be like, be the head of Microsoft. But I remember I was thinking to myself, I was 9 years old, and I'm like, what happens if I become a doctor? And what happens if I become a surgeon? And what happens after I become a surgeon, after I've been married and got a big house, I get injured. And my hand becomes injured, and I can't be a surgeon anymore. And what happens if I can't be a surgeon anymore, but then I become a teacher? Will my wife still be with me? Will people still give me respect? Would I still have value in the community? Mind you, I was 9 years old, so it shows you the mindset of a 9-year-old, precocious, perhaps neurotic Wajahat lead. And the reason why I mentioned that was I was really always bothered, and I still am, by how identity and success is measured by oftentimes the occupation and purely material wealth, especially if you're a child of quote-unquote immigrants. And there's a reason for that, and we'll get into it, but I always really challenged that ever since I was 9 years old, because I just didn't want to be one thing. I just didn't want to be either the doctor or the lawyer. I kept looking at all the role models, and I'm like, what happens if I want to write a play? Or what happens if I want to be a doctor but also do some community service work? What happens if I don't want to be valued by my car or my house? What happens if I just want to be valued as Wajahat, the dude who happens to do cool things? And so the reason why that's interesting is I was undeclared up until my senior year of college. I went to UC Berkeley. I'm the only child of my parents. And I gotta give my parents props for actually giving me that leeway to explore, because they always knew I was the oddball of the family. I'm the only person of my family who's left-handed, by the way. Is anyone here left-handed? Okay, so you know what I went through, and you know what I went through, right? For those of you who don't know anything about Muslim cultures, apparently being left-handed means you're like a jinn. You're like this. And my family to this day they don't realize that it's not our choice, right? So my family to this day, I eat with my right hand because I was forced to eat with my right hand. But like if I'm going to like a buffet table, I'll take the food out with my left hand, and my aunts do like hawk-like audits, and like literally from across the room, my aunt would be like, we don't eat with our left hand. We use that hand for one thing only. And she said this at like a very big event, which was humiliating for me. But just goes to show you, I was the oddball out of my family. I was left-handed. I was always sick. I was, mashallah, very healthy. You guys know what healthy means? Yeah, I was, and they always used to go like this, but he's healthy. I was always sick. I was very shy, right? And I never really fit in, but the one thing that I did love doing was I loved telling stories, and I loved storytelling. And my first passion was drawing. A lot of people don't know that. Like, that was before writing and everything else. I used to draw all the time. I used to read comic books, and I used to draw. And I remember I was I was about 17 years old, senior year of UC Berkeley, and they said to me that if you do not declare, you can't join up in your senior year. So I went to an advisor, and I'm like, what should I do? And he goes, well, you have enough classes to do an English major. We'll convert your Arabic and your Near Eastern Studies Islam thing into just English prereqs. I'm like, how? He goes, I'll just do it like this, check, check. I'm like, literally that's what happened. I'm like, dope. And he goes, just take 2 more classes, you'll be an English major. So I became an English major. But things, you look back and you connect the dots, and I was undeclared, I became an English major, and when I went to law school eventually. But after I graduated law school, I was about 26 and 27, and I woke up and I'm like, what do I want to be when I grow up? And I realized, I'm like, holy crap, I'm 26 right now. I'm grown up. Okay, this was like a profound experience for me. I'm like, there's an epiphany. I'm like, the decisions that I make now will impact my future. I'm no longer a quote-unquote kid. Like, what am I doing with my life? So I decided to take a risk and follow, if you will, my passion of storytelling. And mind you, I'm the only kid. I'm son of Pakistani immigrants. The checklist of success in my community was the following. By the age of 30, if you're a male and you happen to have the privilege of education, you go to undergrad, you follow the holy trinity of professions, doctor, engineering, business. By the age of 30, you're supposedly married. On the scale of 0 to 10 of hotness, hopefully your wife can be on the 7.2, right? Maybe 7.4. By the age of 35, you pop out 2.4 kids. You live in the suburbs, you get a nice house. Because you're Pakistani or Iranian, you have to get a Mercedes or BMW. And then you go do Hajj by the time you're 40, and you post photos of Hajj on Facebook so people think you're pious. Then you grow a beard out. Then, you know, basically, it's like, that's the checklist. This is a checklist that's been handed down. This is the recipe. As many of those boxes that you check off, you'll be valued as a success. As many of those boxes that you don't check off, it'll be like a demerit, it'll be valued as a failure. In my 20s, real quick, I was nothing but a failure. I was poor. I couldn't get a job after I graduated from law school. I moved back home. I moved back home and lived in the same room that I was living in when I was in high school. Every day I used to wake up, I used to find $5 bill in my wallet, and I'm like, who gave me this $5 bill? And my father said, Beta, no grown man should be without $5. And he put the $5 bill in my wallet. When I got older, my mom told me that when my father was that same age, like early 30s, married to my mom, same thing happened to him, right? Educated guy, things were supposed to work out one way, but he failed. My grandfather was living with him, and he used to wake up every day and find $5 in his wallet, because my grandfather used to put $5 in his wallet and say, Beta, no man should be without $5. But I felt like an immense failure. I had the 1997 Camry. I don't know what I was doing with my life, and I took a risk at the age of 26, 27 when I had that epiphany to start writing again. I invested in myself and I invested in my passions. And that passion led to a mission statement. That mission statement was the following, and I'll end it on this. Hopefully. Am I boring you guys? No. All right, just give me one more minute. It was, I love storytelling. I want to tell stories that are by us for everyone. I want to share stories for a diverse, global, multicultural audience with the hope of educating, entertaining, and bridging the divides. That was my mission statement. I was 26, 27, I had no money. I had an Ethernet cable that was yellow attached to a Fujitsu laptop that was about to die. Nobody knew me, a brown guy, left-handed with a multi-syllabic name, Wajahat in Fremont, California at the age of 26, about to turn 27, who felt like a failure in his life, and who felt that by the age of 30 he was gonna die, and had to do something before he died at the age of 30. So like when he died at Yom HaQiyamah, Judgment Day, God would say, you weren't totally a useless brown person, and you did something. So that's why I embarked on writing the play, and we could talk about that, but those things about, those things that I thought would, made me a failure, I look back on life now, and to quote Steve Jobs, if you will, you connect the dots when you look back. Had it not been for that awkward childhood, had it not been for that rejection of that checklist that was supposedly handed down to me that I had to follow, was it not for my investment in a risk in those passions, I would not be sitting here today. And had it not been for my acceptance that indeed I was a failure, that I'll chart my own path, I don't think I would have embraced my definition of success, which I think is important, especially for young college students who want to find out what they want to do in life. And specifically, a lot of people think I moved to DC for the Al Jazeera stream job. What I'll just mention right before I'll end is, my wife's here as a witness to this. My grandmother passed away. We got married in late August 2012. For 6 months, we lived apart. I was in Fremont, California. She was in DC. I was taking care of my grandmother. My grandmother passes away late December 2012. I buried my grandmother. I'm like, well, let me move now to DC to be with my wife. This was just like, a year ago, right? So people thought I was a success. Literally, I had like $2,000 left in my bank account. All I had for my possessions were my 1997 Toyota Camry. I had my PS3. I had a couple of books. My wife came the week before I moved, and she looked at my closet, and she said, "Oh, bichara," which translated to "Oh, miskeen," which translated to "Oh, poor man," Because literally I just had a couple of clothes, I had the Samsonite bag, I had a PS3, I had a couple of books, I had a couple of comic books, and I had my car. I literally have two shady Ukrainians drive my car from Fremont, California to Washington, D.C. It was hilarious because they came at Fudger time, 4 a.m. I gave them my car and they're like, we will take your car and we'll get there by next Tuesday. You must be there on Tuesday from 12 to 4 p.m. and if you're not there, we cannot guarantee your car. And I'm like, this is really shady. He goes, you can accept or not, but that's the conditions. And they were the cheapest ones, so I just went with them. And I told Sarah, I'm like, they literally might use my car to ship a dead body or drugs. So if I get like arrested in DC, I did not kill anybody. And so alhamdulillah, my car ends up there. I end up March moving to DC, and I made a vow to Sarah. I said, inshallah, within a year, stick by me. I promise you, within a year, I will get a job. I will subsidize your life. Just give me a year. And Sarah, to her credit, took a risk on me. This broke lawyer who left law to invest in writing, who was taking care of his family, who was poor, who did not have a single box checked off on that checklist of success, except I guess the educational level. We were very privileged with that. She took a risk on me. I go to DC with nothing, just like literally I'm like, I'll go for my wife, inshallah, something will happen. A month after I get to DC, lo and behold, people said at Al Jazeera America Stream that we're launching Al Jazeera America, a new channel. We're launching the stream of Al Jazeera America. You are actually on the top of our list as co-hosts, but we said we couldn't get Wajahat because he's on the West Coast. We had no idea you're coming to DC. Do you want to come try out for a TV job even though you've never done TV in your life? I'm like, okay. And lo and behold, I wore makeup for the first time, and they put on a lot of damn makeup. They put me in front of the TV cameras. I had no idea what I was doing. I literally did a dua before I sat down. They did my screen test. A month later, I go to New York for my last official interview. The guy who hired me says, listen, your screen test sucked, but this team in DC has a lot of faith in you. Do you promise that you will work hard and not suck? And if so, we'll give you this job. But you have to literally tell me you will work hard and not suck. And I said, I promise I'll work hard and try not to suck. He goes, okay. 10 minutes before that, at the start of the interview, for 10 minutes they asked me about animation, and then I had no idea what they were talking about. It's a true story. And they said, wait, are you Wajahat from Hyderabad, India for the animation job? I'm like, no, but I could be. It's a true story. And then they were really embarrassed because they didn't have my resume, and they thought they were talking to Wajahat from Hyderabad. So then they sat down and they're like, can you prove to us like you can do journalism and who are you? And for an hour I had to like defend my life in front of these Al Jazeera people. We started talking, they thought I was a cool guy. Then things clicked. Oh yeah, this guy's here for the stream. They asked me that question, and lo and behold, I got the job offer and the contract in June, and I fulfilled my promise to Sarah. So I got it within a year. So I want to talk a lot more. I went on beyond 5 minutes. We'll talk a lot about the responsibilities and burdens of all this stuff, and I hope you guys weren't bored. Thanks for inviting me. I'll pass it on to the better half.
Hey, Assalamu alaikum. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's always hard to follow up with Wajahat on a speech because he's so funny. But I'm really excited to be speaking here amongst Haroon and Wajahat. And I think I wanted to open up a little bit with a lot of what I wanted to talk about was also failure and struggles, and how, whether it's your personal life or your career, how beneficial struggles can be, and something that we're all going to go through. But just thinking back to career and the way we look at the world, I grew up in a small town, Okeechobee, Florida. It's like the rodeo was the main event in town. There was like one main intersection. There were 5 brown families, a lot of white people. So I grew up in that town, and I just remember certain experiences from that which kind of shaped the way I thought about things. But I remember once, I was in 9th grade in high school, and I was really sick, and I had to leave computer. I told the substitute teacher in computer class, I was like, I really need to go to the bathroom. Like, I was gonna vomit, and she's like, no, you're not allowed to go. And she was really rude, and I asked her a few more times. I was like, I'm gonna vomit in this classroom if you don't let me go. And she's like, well, just write your name down on the sheet, and I'll see if I'll let you go. So I wrote down my name, and then she totally changed the way she interacted with me. She's like, oh my God, you're Dr. Kureshi's daughter? And she was like the sweetest person in the world to me, and then was like, oh yeah, Harry, go do this, and then took care of me. And it disgusted me so much, because I just felt like if I wasn't a doctor's daughter, or if I wasn't somebody who she knew's daughter, like the way she treated me so differently. And I think it just made me think about like the checklist Wajahat was talking about, and how I just wasn't interested in any of those labels. And I wanted to do things I wanted to do because I was passionate about them, and not because it pleased other people or because it would build a good name for myself. So that was just a small example that just I really specifically remember, that I just was really moved by that moment and turned off by it, and it kind of changed the way I thought about things. So my dad is an orthopedic surgeon, and I remember writing essays when I was younger, growing up, saying, oh, I want to be a doctor when I get older, and I think that was just because that's what I was exposed to. When I actually got to college, I, like Wajahat, was confused, switched my majors a few times. I was an anthropology major and then a psychology major, and I eventually switched to biology because in college I realized that there's something about you do what you love, but you also try to figure out what you're good at. And so the reason I actually ended up picking medicine was because my skills and my passion actually matched together. I would love to be a writer like these guys. I think writing is such a powerful way to reach people, and I just, those weren't where my skills lied. So it was one of those things where you try to find a balance between your passions and your skills. So one of my college experiences that really shaped what I'm doing now was I guess this goes back to one thing I encourage for you all, is just to take advantage of all the opportunities you have. I mean, I remember in college, there's so many things that you could take advantage of and that come your way, and something that I ended up doing was I traveled to and this is where refugee camps comes in, by the way. I traveled to the border of Burma and Thailand to go work in a refugee camp. And for me, it was more, I knew it was a selfish experience. It was more like, oh, I haven't had any international experiences, and I'd like to go see what this is like. And during that time, I was a pre-med major, and I just wanted to go and like do medical work. There was a clinic I researched about, found out about, and I created like this opportunity. So I remember when I was there was this little Burmese refugee child that would greet me at the clinic every single morning and carry my backpack for me, like from the entrance of the clinic to the back where I was treating his mom. She had HIV, actually. Not treating, I was like a student. I didn't know anything. I was just like helping out. But I remember just meeting with political activists and meeting with human rights groups, and realizing that just as like a medical doctor, I wasn't doing much for the people. Even if I had medical skills, I wasn't like changing their overall situation. And so I remember then being like, I'm really interested in the bigger picture of things, and public health and community health. So that just led into what I'm doing now. And I feel my experience in refugee camps have been really pertinent to me, because you're with people who have lost everything, and you learn so many lessons from people who are in those situations and seeing what they're going through. Waj wants me to talk about Unity Healthcare. Yeah, no, I will get to that. Well, I guess, so the clinic I worked at the past few years is underserved urban African American population. And it's really hard being there and seeing the lives of people, especially hearing privileged people talk about people just need to pull themselves up by the bootstraps and get out of things. When I see so many patients, especially my African American male patients, who really have 5 check marks against them by the time they're born. Like, life is already so hard for them. So one of the things I just wanted to briefly talk about with you all, or hopefully, how many of you in the audience are thinking about going into medicine? Okay, so a few. So I figured there wouldn't be that many, and so in terms of what the work I do, what I wanted to say is, like, no matter what field you go into, I think we have such a large responsibility to our communities. And whether you're an engineer, or whether you're a writer, or whether you're a lawyer or a doctor, there's so many ways you can combine it with, like, serving your community. And so for me, that was where I combined medicine and public health and volunteer work, and that's like what I love doing. But I mean, I think Huffington Post came out with a statistic that 6.7% of the world actually gets a college degree. So, like, if you're sitting in this room and you have a college degree, I mean, we are such a rarity, and along with that privilege comes such a responsibility for us. And so regardless of like what field you're in, I definitely think there's such a big way that you can impact communities and impact the world, even if it's locally or internationally. So that was just something hopefully we can get into later on. My experiences, I think at some point I realized that it's really hard to travel back and forth and go work in refugee camps globally. So I found a way to balance it by working with immigrants locally and working in clinics that serve underserved populations. And I really love what I do. I don't advocate. Wajahat always talks about how people shouldn't go into medicine, but that checklist for a doctor. That's not why I became a doctor. But I feel like I am really privileged and able to provide skills to the community. And so as you guys, I remember the pressure of being in college and everybody, asking what you're going to do and trying to figure out your life. And I think one of the things is really doing things that make you happy and not trying to please other people. That's so important. I saw so many miserable colleagues in medical school, people whose parents forced them to do it, or people who just felt like they had to do it. And that's just, that can be a really sad path to go. So definitely think about where your skills are, what you're good at. And the last thing I just want to end on, this isn't really my story, it was just, I wanted to just touch a bit on how Islam has played a role in my career choices and the way I've gone through the path. I think, I'm sure you guys have experienced this, and Wajahat and I talk about it a lot. There's just so much pressure in terms of in your courses, other people doing better, competing, trying to be top of your class, right? Do you guys all feel that type of pressure all the time? You don't? Okay, awesome. Well, I especially being in medicine, I saw it so much. And I remember when I started medical school, I kind of made a vow to myself to be I want to be a great doctor. I want to be the best doctor for my patients, but I really don't care where I rank in my class. That was, and maybe I knew I wanted to do family medicine. It wasn't as competitive, but whatever it was I'm going to be good at what I do, but I'm not going to put so much pressure on myself. There's always going to be somebody smarter. There's always going to be somebody more talented. But as long as you're giving it your best, and I feel like a lot of that just comes from Islamic teachings of being content with what the skills that Allah has given you, and not comparing yourself to other people, but kind of comparing yourself to your own self. So I was never so hard on myself, and I think Wajahat is disgusted by my resume, but I never was I'm going to go to such and such school. I'm not saying it's bad to have ambitions, we should, but I think that doors open along the way, opportunities open, but if you're doing what you love, and you're doing it to please Allah, or you have this purpose behind it, I feel like doors will open up. And anyways, just accepting kind of what has been given to you and being so grateful for that is something that has played a big role. And the last thing I'm just going to say is just failures. I think the things I've learned the most from along my journey is the struggles that I've had, or the times where I haven't done well, or the colleges I got rejected from, or the med schools I got rejected from, or the times I didn't do so well. I think that you learn a lot. It builds a lot of character. During medical school, I was married and divorced during medical school, and then I was married and divorced during residency. And those were not easy things to go through, and I would never wish that upon anybody, but even, those experiences taught me so much, and they never stopped me from my career or doing what I wanted to do because I was passionate about it. So this is something where you guys are gonna face, we're all dealing with, we're gonna continue to face. So just for me, Islam has grounded me on that path and that whole way, and that's something hopefully we can touch on more. So thanks for listening.
Good evening. All praise is due to God, Lord of the worlds, and prayers and peace upon all the prophets, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, John the Baptist, Muhammad, and all who came in between. We send blessings and salutations upon all of them, and for those of us here in this room, if we are never reunited again here, I pray that we are united in His company in the life to come. So someone asked me before the talk how to discover your passion in life, and you'll remain nameless. And I think that's kind of in the vein of this event and what we're talking about. And I think there's three things that I feel in my experience allow one to find and pursue one's passion. The first is knowing what your passion is, right? That's important. The second is to understand what your greatest fear is. And the third is failure. One of the worst things that can happen to a person is that she succeeds early, because you never discover what you are capable of, and you don't want to peak too early anyway, because then you just go into decline for the rest of your life, so that's not very cool, right? You want to you gotta pace these things, right? And I think for me, in the last few years, I've started writing because of those three things. So I want to address at least two of them, and then we'll have Q&A. But what I also wanted to make sure to say before I get into this is my research and academic focus is Islamic thought and history. So if you have any questions on Islam, and I mean anything, do not feel in any way ashamed or awkward. You can ask questions about mental illness, terrorism, extremism, women's rights, Islamic history. I don't care. I've heard all those questions, and I'm more than happy to discuss them honestly and openly and seriously. So for the Q&A, please do keep that in mind. Don't restrict questions to just, for example, what I'm talking about. So actually, I moved to Queens about 3 years ago, and one of the reasons I moved to Queens was I wanted to have an extra room, because living in New York, like a room is basically your life savings. And now I had a library and a room that I could write in. And I thought to myself, and it's funny, Wajahat was talking about how things just happen at the right time. So I had set up basically kind of like a writer's studio. You know, some people have a man cave, right? Mine was like a book cave, right? Like the books dominated and I was like huddled in the corner. By the way, the one thing that sucks about books that I've learned is when you have to move, like your life stinks, right? Because your entire life is basically packs of books. And Wajahat called me and said that he was editing a book full of essays by American Muslim men, and he asked me if I wanted to write an essay. And in typical Haroon style, I said, yeah, sure, that's awesome. And then I was like, wait, on what? And I think that may have been a separate call actually, right? Because I got so excited, I just kind of went ahead and went with it. And when I sat down, I found myself debating whether or not I was going to write something really honest and forthright. And I decided, and Wajahat was fine with this, to write about why I became an atheist. And I was convinced that in writing that, I would probably be assaulted, slandered, forced to change my name, disowned, something like that. But I wasn't. And actually, the response I got was overwhelmingly positive, and it was an interesting reflection on where I think the American Muslim community has come to, that these kinds of conversations could happen in the open. And to me, that was part of my process of learning what my passion was and what motivated me. And I know we're a little bit behind on time, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but I can address that moving forward. And then, actually yesterday, day before yesterday, a book came out called Salam Love, American Muslim Men on Love, Sex, and Intimacy, and I have an essay in there. And the reason I wrote the essay in there is because that essay helped me come to terms with and understand my greatest fear. And so I actually want to talk about my greatest fear through an embarrassing story of what happened when I was 17 years old, which is also in the essay, but you should still buy the book, because in case it's being recorded, the editors will kill me. That would be ironic. And book sales would rise and fall at the same time. It makes sense if you think about it for a minute. And then by the second minute, it does make sense again. It's like a lot of things in life. I was a really awkward kid growing up, as you can probably tell. I watched Star Trek and Star Wars. I still do, being honest. I was very bookish. I was incredibly shy. I had severe social anxiety. I did not leave the house. I was incredibly sick. I had my first surgery when I was 2 days old. I had my second surgery when I was 10 months old. I had glasses from when I was 4 months old. And some of you ask, how can you have glasses when you're 4 months old? They put a rubber band around your head, and then what do? You go, and then it smacks you in the face. And that's how you learn causation and causality. So I understood physics before many of you, which is why I'm up here. So, it's true. It hurt too. If you have an older brother, man, it's so easy, because if you take him off, you can't see anything, and bam, smacks you upside the head. So, I had another surgery when I was about 2 or 3. When I was 5, I had some sort of hip disorder, something happened that I couldn't walk for like weeks. I had surgery when I was 23, I had surgery when I was 20. Basically, I've had over a dozen procedures in my life. So I was always a sick kid, I was always a shy kid. And then something incredibly bad happened
from the perspective of being the child of Pakistani immigrants living in suburban Connecticut. I started to like girls, and then I realized that I could actually talk to girls. And so I came up with this, basically, I tried to come up with excuses to basically live out what my parents were telling me to live out, which was that you're not allowed to date. Sometime around the age of 35, which to note I am still not at, I would be provided a spouse, assuming I passed the whole medical school kind of track, which I think we do to prove that we have the right to basically procreate, right? So you have to prove that you're smart enough to have children, basically. I think that's the Pakistani sort of mentality, right? We'd never talked about girls or dating or anything like that in my house. It was just very clearly understood that that did not happen. And I decided that I wanted to go to my high school prom. I thought that this would be the coolest thing ever. It would be like Ferris Bueller's Day Off or Take Me Home Tonight or one of those awesome movies that only America can produce about high school, right? That's the reason we're a superpower, because nobody else can make movies like that. Those are like the funnest movies in the world. So I came up with this whole plan for how I was going to sneak out to prom. Like I had this amazing, literally like detailed, one of my friends actually said it's more complicated than D-Day. I had come up with like every possible contingency plan. I had to pay for prom. How do you pay for prom without your parents knowing that you're earning hundreds of dollars and you're not apparently spending it on anything, right? So I applied for a job at McDonald's, which I would like to note I was not called back for, which is a little bit kind of, I know mashallah as we say, right? That's amazing, right? McDonald's is like, right? Like, he doesn't really look like he has the ability to mop the floor. I guess if you looked at me then, I guess I would probably believe that too. And so I came up with this idea which was awesome and illegal. I wrote people's thesis papers. That's how I learned to become a writer, if you want to know the honest answer. So technically I graduated high school like 10 times because I wrote like 10 thesis papers. I charged $400 if you wanted me to write the whole thing, $200 if you had a final draft you wanted me to polish it off, $100 if you wanted me to write a draft for you, and $50 to do background research. And in this way I raised something like $2,000. And that's how I paid for prom. And I pulled off the whole thing, and I thought I was the frickin' man, right? It was like James Bond in the version of an awkward 17-year-old Pakistani who was dating a cheerleader, right? My parents did not know. I parked my car literally on the other side of town in the backyard of some person's house who was like gone for the year, under their deck, right? Just so in case like my parents might be driving around, and like randomly, because this kind of stuff happens, man. Like people get caught in the dumbest ways, right? I was counseling a kid at a university in New England who was like, I don't know what to do. My parents found out I had a girlfriend. It's horrible. I'm like, well, how did they find out? He's like, well, I went back home to see her, and then I ran a red light, and I didn't realize it, and the camera snapped the picture of the car, and she's in the front seat, and they mailed it to the house. And I was like, damn, man, God hates you. So anyway, awesome story short, I pulled it off, I went to prom, everyone thought I was awesome, the school principal was in on it, like everybody knew apparently except my parents. I'm really sorry, I apologize in retrospect. And the next day she broke up with me. So like it was just like, right, like it just, it was kind of like a deflationary moment, shall we say. And I realized that it affected me really, really, really badly. And it occurred to me that I had just assumed that I would be dating this girl forever, that in my mind, in doing an end run around my parents, I was still my parents. And my assumption was that once you enter into a relationship with someone, whether you call it marriage or not, the commitment is supposed to be permanent. And so I was, ironically, more Catholic than the Catholic girl, I suppose, in this instance. I just assumed we were going to get married. Right? We had like nothing in common, by the way. Like it would have been the worst marriage ever, right? But like in my mind, this is what people did, right? I mean, don't blame me. I'm South Asian. We're Bollywood, right? Every Bollywood movie ends the exact same way, right? Guy gets girl, they live happily ever after. And like that's it. We don't have anything other than that in our movies. And it occurred to me that my greatest fear is not death. Because growing up as a really sick kid, I was very, I don't know if I want to say comfortable. I knew I was going to die, right? Because I grew up sick. And I accepted and understood that health was something that I was not particularly blessed with, and it was not going to last. And yet I was able to reconcile that because if I believed in an afterlife, I believed that eventually you just see everyone again. So you're parted for a while, right? But you come back and you see that person. But the thing that killed me was, why would it be that you would get into these situations in your life where you would meet someone and you could have a relationship with someone and then it could end? And it started to occur to me, and I think the fear sort of compounded over time, that you can get things and then they can leave you, and then you start to wonder what the point of those things is at all. And I think for me that was the fear. And in order to be a writer, and let's end with this, you have to be very willing to deal with that kind of uncertainty. Because you have no clear career track, you have no idea how anyone's going to react to what you're writing, and you have no idea if you'll have another idea ever again. Right? So you can work, I just handed in a book draft a week ago, I'm working on another one, and in the back of my mind I think to myself, what happens after this? What happens if the book bombs? What happens if nobody cares about it? What do you do with your career? Can you pick up? Can you keep going? A writer's life, a creative life, is an incredibly uncertain and difficult life, because it is a life that is entirely self-generated. Thank you.
I want to thank you guys for such, like, 3 awesome, inspirational speeches. I don't even think I was expecting anything close to that. Can we have a round of applause for I would like to open the floor up to general questions or any questions that you guys have for the speakers. I think I'll start off with the first one because I have questions that I am actually dying to ask you. I'm going to start off with Haroon. Recently in the essay that you mentioned, you talked about being a professional Muslim. I was wondering if you can actually elaborate on that. And then followed by Sar and Wajahat, your experiences in being a professional Muslim and how you balanced everything you've done while being a Muslim.
The term professional Muslim refers to what I think happened to the American Muslim community after September 11th. I was, at the time, a senior in college. I'll tell another story, like, really quickly, and then I'll explain why I use the term professional Muslim. I got really into MSA, Muslim Students Association, the equivalent at NYU, when I was a freshman. It was part of discovering my passion. But I wasn't a particularly religious kid. I had a very conflicted relationship to Islam, but I loved my community, and I wanted very much to build a kind of community where people who had an uncertain relationship to their religion could feel at home. I wanted a place that was welcoming, not judgmental, and not closed. And the experiences I had had growing up were of communities that were not open and welcoming to people and encouraging of people, but tended to push people away or look very negatively towards doubt or introspection and questions that don't have easy answers. I can't believe I'm going to say this. Whatever. Let me just say it. The last day of my junior year at NYU, I had written a poem. Again, Bollywood, so you understand background. This girl I liked, and I sent her flowers to her room with 2 lines from the poem anonymously attached to the flowers. And then I had invited her to a poetry reading a week later where I was going to read the poem, including the verses in question. She was not able to make it. So there's your first sign, right? Sometimes the universe kind of like nudges you, like, not Haroon, stop, right? And we don't listen. And I had delegated some of my friends, who for reasons unknown to me remain my friends, to do background research on this girl. And I will get into details. I'm not like a weird stalker person, okay? I'll explain what I meant by that. So I decided that I would take her out to a cafe and read the poem. And so I took her to a cafe and I started reading the poem, and about halfway through the poem, her boyfriend came and sat down. Exactly, right? I was like, that's what I meant by background research, right? That's the one question that was in my mind that they failed to answer, right? I was like, can you make sure she's not attached? He is now a husband of hers and father of their children, so fail. The good thing was, he was Pakistani, I'm of Pakistani origin, but I speak Arabic. She was Arab, And so we had a conversation with her boyfriend sitting next there about what had just happened. So I thought it was a very interesting sort of divine wisdom that because God had allowed me the opportunity to study Arabic, I was now able to get rejected in the language of the Quran, which was really like a profound moment, you know. And really, you know, you've really never understood Arabic until you've been dumped in Arabic. And then all this Habibi nonsense just goes out the window, man. It's all a load of crap. And that day I was elected president of the Islamic Center. So this was your president. And I was, you know, and I thought to myself, it's fine, I'm just helping build a Muslim community, and I'm gonna be gone, like after senior year, that's it, I'll go do like the medical thing. And the next semester, September, you know, third day of classes, I got out of the subway, everyone's congregating on the sidewalk. In New York, we do not congregate on the sidewalks, we dash across the street, we dare cars to run us over. We believe that we are able to withstand collisions, right, we don't mind. But everyone stopped and staring. And I looked up and World Trade Center Tower 1 was on fire. And so I asked someone what had happened, and they said that a plane had flown into it. And so I assumed, like many people, that this was a small plane, like a you know, a private jet or something like that, something tiny, and it was a horrible accident, and I went to class. And I went to class, and about an hour in, a student named Basha came downstairs, he knocked on the door, and he said, the second World Trade Center has been hit. It took me about 2 or 3 seconds to realize this was a terrorist attack. I had a pretty extensive background in Middle Eastern studies. I realized who was almost guaranteed to be behind it. And our professor, who's Iranian, literally said, those of you who are Muslim cannot leave the room, everyone else can go. And it was kind of awkward silence, and you know, all the other students left. And we were sitting there, and he said, should I do the accent? No, I wouldn't. He's like, we have a problem today because we are Persian. No, he said, we make very nice carpets and kittens, and we read poetry, and you don't like our country, but we invented civilization. For any of you who are Persian, that was deliberate. No, and you know, seriously, he said, you know, go home and don't leave your houses. And it occurred to me that I was now president of the Islamic Center, and Ground Zero was about a 20-minute walk from NYU's campus. We were the only major Muslim community within walking distance of Ground Zero. And I realized that it was my obligation as a Muslim and as an American to become involved and to contribute to a conversation that we needed to have and to change communities that I was a part